Hi, everyone. Thank you for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. I'm Hejin Lee. I'm an assistant professor in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies here. And this is our October joint colloquium with Ethnic Studies and American Studies. Cue for applause. We've been really having a great time doing this colloquium in the hopes of community building amongst our three departments, and it's been going very well. I co-organize with Professor Ethan Caldwell of Ethnic Studies, who many of you know, and also Professor Joyce Mariano in American Studies. She couldn't be here today. Our next event, I want to let you all know really quickly before we move on to today, will take place November 7th, and it's a book launch for the Critical BTS Reader. November 7th from 3 to 5 at the Center for Korean Studies. And this is Lucy, if any of you are wondering. Also, you might have seen our socials revolving up here. If you don't follow us already, please take a minute to do so now. We would love to have you join us on the social spaces. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Ethan Caldwell, who will introduce our very special guest.
All right. Thank you, Hejin. Good morning and afternoon, folks. Hope y'all are doing well. I'm glad to see a lot of students here, a lot of folks from around campus for a really interesting talk that we're about to have with Dr. Mark Villegas, who is an associate professor of American Studies at Franklin Marshall University.
College.
College. Sorry.
We small. We got 1,000 students. So
small but big impact.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We'll say yes.
And we've already begun. Mark has received his PhD in cultural theory at the University of California, Irvine, and a master's in Asian American Studies at UCLA. And a lot of his work he's done some work in regards to being rooted in community engagement and collaboration. As a filmmaker trained in Center for Ethno Communications at UCLA, he also embraces the artistic and scholarly imperative, as he puts in his bio, to recuperate stories of marginalized people and histories. Some of his work you might have seen with the co-edited anthology called Empire of Funk, Hip Hop and Representation in Filipina/O America, back from 2014. His book, Manifest Technique, Hip Hop, Empire, and Visionary Filipino-American Culture, examines Filipino-Americans' decades-long commitment to crafting, world-making, and collaborating in hip-hop culture. And in that book, he argues that hip-hop culture is operated as a critical site where Filipino Americans have been investigating their racial position in history and the world, thus expanding opportunities for these practitioners to author their popular representation. And so today, Mark is joining us to talk a little bit about some of his current research, which is on, and we'll go back to the slide, Black Orientalism from Islam to BlerDCon. And so, we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A to start it off between the two of us, and then we're going to open it up to questions that you folks might have. I also want to make note, I hope you also see his t-shirt here, if you don't mind standing up and showing the audience a little bit, because I think that's also pretty
people
fresh.
Know Super Mario, that's still a thing, right? Yeah, okay.
I would hope so. And so I want y'all to also just join me in welcoming Dr. Villegas to UH Manoa.
Thank you, everybody. So happy to be here. It's hot over here right now.
It's a little warm.
On the East Coast, it's already in the 60s. Here it's like 90.
Well, on the East Coast, it's fall, right?
Yes.
Here, it might be in quotation marks.
Yeah.
It might be in quotation marks. So give us a little bit about yourself. How do you come to this topic of all topics? What got you into talking about blurred folk? But more importantly, how does your previous work lead you to this point?
Sure. So just to give a definition of blurred, this is a new word that people had made up probably in the past maybe 10 years. So it's a conflation of black nerd. Right, so people call themselves blurred culture, blurred scenes. That's kind of what we're getting at here. So really, even before blurred, this term was popular, I knew blurs growing up, and definitely at UC Irvine. People from California here, anybody in the house? Southern California? Okay. Wow, we got one person. We got 3 people, 4 people, okay. At UC Irvine, when I was there as a graduate student, this was kind of a thing too. You saw black folks, and they were proudly expressing their love of anime, video games, K-pop, right? And at my current campus right now, Franklin Marshall College, this is definitely a scene too. Black folks, Latino folks, like people who are into K-pop and into gaming and anime, and they're displaying that and showing that to you, right? So I think what's popular right now at my campus is folks wearing like the Japanese characters, like the both the anime characters, but also the script on their clothing. It's probably a thing here as well. Yeah, no?
Yeah.
I don't know, okay. And so like even before I knew this term blurred, I think that I just understood it growing up. I'm from Florida, so I saw that there with white folks, Filipinos, black folks, like this was a thing in the 90s. There was no name for it. I think now folks are building community and naming themselves as such, black nerds. This is what I'm really interested in looking at how they understand, interpret Asian people, Asianness. Japan especially is important here as a scene of like folks being inspired by Japan and Asia in different ways in creating and understanding their own blackness through Japan, through anime. And you'll see that definitely articulated with some of the characters that I'll talk about a little bit today.
Cool. And then can you give us a little bit more actually about these sort of characterizations of nerd and geek culture that they're not only immersed with, but also perhaps even pushing the boundaries around?
Yeah, so let me just back up because I think you asked another question a second ago that I didn't answer yet that ties into this question here about nerd and geek writ large. So my previous book, as I talked about, was about Filipino Americans in hip hop. This book is not about Filipino Americans' contributions in hip hop. People want this book to be about Filipino Americans' contribution in hip hop. People think that's what it is. They quote it and cite it and say this book is about Filipino Americans' contributions in hip hop. This is not about that. I mean, inherently it is because we're talking about Filipinos' participation in hip hop. This book is more about Filipino American culture being created through hip hop. It's the reverse, right? So how do Filipino Americans themselves understand themselves as being Filipino and American through hip hop culture? The creation of Filipino-ness through blackness, through black popular culture, through hip hop. I think from the 80s up to the early 2000s, this was definitely a cohort of people. One of your professors here understands this very well, Professor Rod Labrador. That's that guy right there. He writes about it as well, right? Filipino Americans defining themselves and building community through hip hop. This was a very much, if you know folks who grew up in the 80s and 90s, it was strong. I talk about Islam here in this book, how folks from San Diego, I don't know why, but mainly from San Diego, but California writ large, converted to Islam, right? Because of the Wu-Tang Clan. Like, this is just wild to me, right? But it's actually a huge community of folks who were inspired by hip hop culture, probably y'all's parents' generation, yeah? That's my first book. And I could break down the chapters. There's 4 different chapters. I could do that some other time. So anyways, this leads me to my next answer to your question about geek and nerd. When people usually think about this term geek or nerd, they think about, let me ask the class this question. Like, what comes to mind? What character from pop culture comes to mind when you think about, oh, that person's a geek, that person's a nerd?
Number 2. From Codename Kids Next Door.
I have no idea what that is. But, yeah. Okay. Steve Urkel. Okay. Now, what's the background of this person that you're talking about?
Number 2 from
Yeah.
Codename Kids Next Door.
Yeah.
He was like this techie, little more heavy-set character.
Okay.
That would, you know, he wore goggles and he helped the rest of the kids next door pull off
Okay.
their hikes and stuff.
But like very into tech, right?
Yeah,
So just
yeah.
kind of like technologically advanced. Who else is a geek or a nerd from pop culture?
Wesley Crusher,
Okay. So
Star Trek.
what's the Star Trek name? What's,
Next Generation.
okay. All right.
The kid at the helm who's like 16 and knows how everything works.
All right. So maybe like a genius, like
Yeah.
someone's like really into the,
Genius, exactly.
right?
I was going to say Doogie Howser from back in the day, too.
Yeah, so, Data. So usually people think like in the literature it's a white guy, right? Someone who's really into the craft. Sheldon Cooper, right? People usually think that in the literature. I mean, perhaps this classroom has a different interpretation, but Sheldon Cooper, for a lot of folks, is a definition, the embodiment of someone who's either a geek or a nerd. Those two things are kind of similar. But Steve Urkel comes up too for black folks. Like, I don't want to be Steve Urkel. Steve Urkel was a dork, and he's not macho, he's not masculine, right? Like, I want to be the anti Steve Urkel because he's bullied, yeah? So this is sort of like the racialization part of black people in relationship to being a geek or a nerd. Steve Urkel is who you don't want to be, yeah? And also Asian men, right? So Asian men are seen as not being man enough, right? Embodying a different type of gender expression. So I think that in general, whiteness and Asianness is scripted onto this idea of geek and nerd, and Steve Urkel doesn't inhabit the proper blackness because he's more on that person who knows he's really into Japanese culture, right? Steve Urkel was. Do people know who Steve Urkel is? Have you heard of this term? Is it this name, right? From Family Matters, right? We grew up with that. So.
I know. I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that becomes really interesting to think about because then you have the counterpoint to Steve Urkel, right?
Yeah.
You have Stefan, who
his
doesn't
alter ego.
Exactly, the alter ego who doesn't embody a lot of these sort of nerd characteristics, and yet as you're thinking about these different folks who fit into what it means to be a nerd, there's also this idea of how race and gender are very much, coinciding with who we even accept as that person. But when it comes to communities being formed around it, how, have you seen this blurred community develop? And, as someone who's volunteered, at BlerDCon and other things, like, what is that like? What is the vibe like when you go to these large communal events where blurs come together?
Has anybody been to a con before? Comic Con, science fiction con, or something like the anime con? Okay, so this is like a thing now. This is kind of a mainstream thing, but I haven't been to too many, but I have volunteered for BlerDCon, which is in DC, Washington, DC. I've been to 3 of them so far. The 2022 theme for BlerDCon, Black NerdCon, yeah, in DC. So they make DC capitalize here to emphasize this is Washington, DC. Anyway, so last year's theme was homecoming, so they had a very much black homecoming HBCU theme. This past year, the theme was Summer Madness, which is kind of this Fresh Prince of Bel-Air type of theme, so very skimpy outfits and whatnot. Anyway, so BlerDCon, I think what is interesting about the scenes that are being created, people are defining themselves as black nerds. And I'm telling you, this is not a small community. These are folks coming together in tens of thousands, right, from all over the country. And so me participating in volunteering for it is very interesting because I'm probably, I don't know, let's say there's 10,000 people at these conventions. I don't know, one of a few Asian people. There's white folks too, but it's definitely a black scene. This is definitely 99.9% black people, which I'm happy about because sometimes these scenes get overrun by non-black people who want to just sort of be amongst, the space, but then sort of take over the limelight of black scenes. This is definitely, in the current moment, in the 5th year of BlerDCon, is definitely still very black. Another convention is called DreamCon, which is bigger than BlerDCon. You've heard of DreamCon before? It's in Austin, Texas. Have you been to it before? It's bigger than BlerDCon. It's huge, and I didn't expect that. I'm telling you, tens of thousands of folks, and I was overwhelmed. So your question was basically, what's my experiences amongst the scene? I think what I'm learning is that there's just more people than I thought who would be involved with this. So if I grew up with some blurs, if my classrooms have some blurs, it's sort of they're an aberration. Maybe they're just scholarly and they're good at school. If you go to a BlerDCon or a DreamCon, it's all kinds of different black people. I think this is what's interesting. And you can't characterize it as just one type of scene. You have many different types of regional people, like people from California, from Texas, from the East Coast, people from Canada, just showing up and representing. So that's one thing I think I'm learning is that the immensity of these scenes. This dog here is...
Yeah, sorry, I'm delivering a little something for
is always
companion,
eating.
Lucy.
This dog is always eating.
Yeah, she's constantly eating. But you bring up this really interesting thing, right? Because when you're saying these scenes are huge,
Yeah.
one, I'm kind of curious about how many folks are attending. And then the other part is if it's, something that becomes an open space for a variety of blackness or representations of blackness or these sort of intersections of blackness and Asianness to exist, what does that present as a point of possibility as well?
Yeah. So that's my interest is like for my book on Filipino Americans and hip hop. I've always been interested in hip hop. And I think hip hop is a precedent to this project because hip hop has provided a space of possibilities, of interracial cooperation, of understanding of mutual empathy and all that stuff. So I think a space like BlerDCon or DreamCon or these blurred spaces in general open up the possibility of folks getting along, right? Of Afro-Asian, what's called Afro-Asian solidarity. That's the aspiration of black folks and Asian folks sort of understanding each other and collaborating with each other. You see that here at BlerDCon. I think I've talked to folks in the leadership of BlerDCon, like we all become friends. I think they're excited about my project. I haven't had any pushback, so I feel welcomed in the community at this point. So I think the possibilities of like just exploring Afro-Asian solidarities is something very hopeful, right? So I think me as a non-black person and folks who are building these spaces are showing interest in what can happen amongst this like mutual cooperation and understanding between black folks and Asian folks. Let me just go to like the logo here, this BlerDCon logo from 2 years ago, just to show you that Blerd is very much like integrated with Asianness, like this the imaginary of Asia, of Japan specifically. The logo has these 4 different things here, symbols that sort of allude to what BlerDCon stands for. You have the video games at the left. I think that's like a video game character. Then you have, I think, in the middle part right here, in reference to comic books, POW, and you have this Japanese symbol. Perhaps Professor Ethan knows what that is. I have no idea.
I'm just wondering what the 2 didactics on the bottom right make for it.
I think
so. I'm curious about how they're using that particular, like katakana, for example. So
I think this is in reference to Legend of Zelda, like this. What is it called? Like that fairy.
Oh goodness! Hold on.
Like the fairy culture.
I have the song in my head more than I have the actual image right now.
So last year's theme was fairy culture, 2023. Fae culture. Okay, and then that's the Japanese symbol. So like anime is definitely part of BlerDCon, so it's comic books, doesn't have to be Japanese. But DreamCon, which I have some pictures of on my slides here, DreamCon is, so if BlerDCon is like 60% about anime fandom, DreamCon is about 98% anime fandom. Like that's definitely about anime. People go there and dress up in cosplay, which I'll show pictures of, hopefully in next few slides, of black folks' fandom for anime is very much strong and apparent.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, if you want to show us, you're welcome to. And then maybe this can also connect with it, because I think as you're talking about the connections that Blerds are making with Afro-Asian entanglements and whatnot, how are they making historical connections as well when it comes to entanglements, encounters, and conflicts?
So this question is about the historical context about black folks' engagement with Asia. And this is what I'm doing as a scholar, right? I'm trying to contextualize the larger history of Afro-Asia, of black folks' entanglements, this term entanglement that you use, with Japan, with Asian people, with Asia. It's a century-long relationship. So what I don't want folks to leave with my project is that this is a new phenomenon of black Orientalism, of black people inspired by Asia, as a new phenomenon. It's not. What I'm trying to do is build threads that demonstrates this longer history and legacy of black folks' entanglements with Asia and Asian people. We can root it perhaps in the early 1900s at its earliest point, and I'm interested to know if like maybe there's an earlier point. I don't know, right? I'm still researching this stuff, but one can point to Noble Drew Ali. He is the earliest founder of Black Islam as a community, as a social movement amongst black folks. So Noble Drew Ali built this type of religious movement and he called black folks in America Asiatic black people, Asiatic black men, and you hear this rhetoric within hip hop. This is how I know about this stuff. It's from Tribe Called Quest, it's from Wu-Tang Clan. So Noble Drew Ali and Black Islam has this rejuvenation because of hip hop culture in the 80s especially. So this fascination, this type of like fantasy production of black people's relationship to Asian people, we can point it to Noble Drew Ali, like early 1900s, 1904, 1905, and then you have the Nation of Islam, which I think people know more about Nation of Islam, yeah? So like Muhammad Ali, Elijah Muhammad, and Nation of Islam is still a thing right now, right? It's still a community, it's still a spiritual movement that exists strongly today. Right, so that term Asiatic of pointing to Mecca, pointing to Islam as a Asian religion, black folks have been entangled, this term entangled with that since the early 1900s, and then rejuvenated through hip hop. And what I'm trying to say now with anime is that we have this return to this type of inspiration by quote unquote the East, right? With, and I can show more slides of folks looking to Japan and China as this like, this is an alternative to white supremacy, to the things that the trauma that we're experiencing here in the US. This other alternative vision of the East is a much more preferable, right, way of living, of philosophy, Christianity, that's white supremacist and that's oppressing me, right? Some folks see that Asia, Islam, this vague notion of the Orient as a more preferred alternative to what they are experiencing here. This is what the literature tells us about Noble Drew Ali, Elijah Muhammad, Muhammad Ali the boxer, and then you see that from some of the blurs.
Mm-hmm. So this is really interesting, right? Because with this picture that's being painted both historically as well as in the more contemporary, I'm then wondering what are these sort of popular characterizations of Japan, of Asia that black entertainers or even blurred cultural producers are having? Like what kind of picture, for example, are they painting of Japan?
Yeah, so what is like Asia and Japan according to blurs,
exactly.
Right? So let me just show some pictures, yeah? Here's like hip hop depictions or EDM, electronic dance music depictions of like Asian stuff. So this is more Chinese. Migos, this is I guess an earlier music video from 2018 called Stir Fry. So you have like Chinese food as super important for the black community in terms of its depictions and understandings of of Asian people and Asianness is through food, yeah? Actually, there's a restaurant in Philadelphia that just opened up. It's called Black Dragon. Did I show this to you, right? So Black Dragon is basically a black-owned Chinese restaurant remixed to have like certain southern black ingredients. But he created that restaurant, Black Dragon, as a response to COVID because a lot of Chinese restaurants got shut down. Asian-owned, Chinese-owned restaurants got shut down because they couldn't afford Philly anymore. He's trying to rejuvenate his experiences, which a lot of black folks in communities like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Philly, they grew up with Chinese food, yeah? So he's trying to have this type of rejuvenation of Chinese in the hood with his own recreation of Chinese food called Black Dragon. Anyway, so Migos is a kind of a showing of this type of black engagement with Chinese food. I think it's a bit, very much, not a bit, very stereotyped. They're kicking ass, so the Migos, the three of them are like, they know Kung Fu for some reason, they kick all the Asian people's asses. You have the sexy Asian women around them, and they have Chinese food. So this borders on, or maybe it is definitely just blatantly stereotypical, yeah? So this is like, I guess, a mid-range, not too early depiction of Asianness. And then you have Drexcia, EDM from Detroit, and their like obsession with karate and martial arts. And you have Wu-Tang Clan. If people are Wu-Tang Clan fans in the house, if people know what Wu-Tang is, right? RZA, Jizza, Ghostface Killah, all that. So the RZA here, his engagement with Asianness is spirituality. He's a vegan. A lot of Wu-Tang people are vegan because of Buddhism and all that stuff. He's Muslim as well, and he's Taoist, and he loves martial arts. And this is like gangsta era hip hop, right? So hip hop is, you can't separate hip hop and Orientalism. Hip hop has been swimming with Asianness, Asian depiction since its very beginning. Wu-Tang Clan does that, I think, epitomizes that. And people might know The Last Dragon on the left side. Do people know what this movie is from 1985, The Last Dragon? You know what this is?
Yeah.
How do you know this movie?
My friend recommended it once to me.
Okay.
Because he watched it with his family.
Did you like it?
Yes, I did.
It was really like it was fun, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
Right? And
Bruce
so people
Leroy.
Bruce Leroy, so Bruce Lee, people know Bruce Lee. The main character's name is Bruce Leroy, right?
Yeah.
As like this a reference to Bruce Lee, and he wears the Bruce Lee outfit.
It's crazy. It's so good.
I could talk about forever, so let me just move on a little bit. And Fushnikins is another example. This is, if people know, has anybody heard of Fushnikins before? They were making like this Chinese-inspired rap before the Wu-Tang Clan. If you can remember, if you can like ever think of that Wu-Tang were not the first to do this, right? Fushnikins, even their name kind of sounds like Wu-Tang. They were doing it. They're from Brooklyn. They're doing this before Wu-Tang, but people don't really know Fushnikins. People know Shaquille O'Neal, yeah? Shaquille O'Neal rapped with Fushnikins. So if you want to do this on your own time, look up Fushnikins and Shaq, because Shaq is rapping with them. He has a whole album called Shaq Fu. This is when Shaq was a rookie. This is like 1992.
Isn't
yeah?
that also a video game by
Shaq Fu video
on the
game. I remember playing that on
Genesis?
Sega Genesis.
Yep.
Y'all don't know, man. Like, this is deep. Shaq be rapping, and also Kobe Bryant. Okay.
And Meta World Peace.
Meta World. Oh, really? Okay. I didn't know. This is like a Buddhist thing.
No. That was just like a hip hop thing.
Oh, it was a hip hop thing. Okay.
One hit wonder. We'll put it like that.
Can I just show a little bit
Oh,
more?
please.
These are some cosplay images. So characters from The Last Dragon, which I just showed enough. This is a Martin Lawrence character named Dragonfly Jones, right? So you have this like very 80s stereotypical depictions of martial arts, of black folks dressing up. So it's black folks dressing up as cosplay in the 80s, and they're cosplaying that cosplay from the 80s. And you also have Busta Rhymes cosplaying as Sho'nuff in Busta Rhymes movie, music video. Do you remember? Huh?
It's not Give Me Some More.
It's Give Me Some More.
It is?
I think it is.
We're going
All
to
right.
look that up another time, too.
We'll look that up too. And you have like Street Fighter 2 reference here, and I think Pokemon, I don't know.
Naruto right there.
Naruto, yeah. And I could also talk about, probably at the very end, of black folks who go to Japan to visit and to live because of their fandom of anime.
That's
DreamCon.
another question coming up.
Yeah, so
Yes.
DreamCon on the left side here. I could talk about mental health in anime too. That's another conversation. I went to this panel here about the use of anime as an allegory for mental health. And then I could talk about these other quotes too.
Right. Well, I'm curious, right? Because when we're looking at these different entertainers,
Yeah.
we've kind of gone through some of the hip hop from the 80s and 90s, even the 2000s. Y'all are probably more familiar with whatchamacallit. I know the song, Thundercat, for example, with Dragon Ball Durag, and also Meg Thee Stallion in her most recent song.
Yeah.
Right. But and I guess with this, I'm thinking about the cosplay, I'm thinking about these sort of different depictions that are through an animated lens or these sort of productions. What are they trying to say, essentially? Like, what is the work that they're trying to do?
Okay, so for like the entertainers,
Yeah.
what is their like rhetoric around Japan, around Asia? I would like to do a comparison with Thundercat, for example, Dragon Ball Durag. Do people know who Thundercat is? Have you heard of him, heard his music? A few folks. Okay, so if we have time, I could play the music video, but he has this music video called Dragon Ball Durag. So Dragon Ball, a very famous anime, and he puts on the durag and he thinks he becomes like this charismatic guy because he has a Dragon Ball Durag on.
I was going to say, the link is right there if you want.
You could play it later,
Yeah.
right? And then I could also, I think I'd be interested in comparing his fandom with Japan. I don't know why it's not showing. With Megan Thee Stallion's fandom with Japan, right? She goes there, she's kind of like a tourist. So I think Thundercat has this like tourist type of embodiment when he goes to Japan. And I think Megan Thee Stallion reiterates this type of tourism of US people going to Japan and basically being consumers of Japanese culture. And that's kind of the limit to that. So the engagement with Afro-Asia an engagement with a deeper legacy of Black and Asian interactions, to me at this point isn't articulated yet. Y'all feel me? It's more of like consumerism, is more about like the gloss of Japan is very appealing for these entertainers, right? For intellectuals, it's deeper, but for entertainers, I think they're just depicting their fandom through consumerism. And I had one more example here. Megaran, has anybody heard of Megaran before? Really? Megaran, he does what's called nerdcore. So he uses like video game music and remixes that into hip hop. He's been around for a while, so he's a little bit older. Been making music since 2002, 2003. This quote to me embodies what I'm trying to talk about here, because I just 2 days ago, I finished his memoir from 2022. And he talks about Japan at the very end of his memoir here. And this is it, y'all. I'm so very inspired by Japan and its culture, probably more so than any other place in the world. It's the place that created so much of my fondest inspirations, from gaming to anime, even fashion and music. So it's like a homecoming every time I return there to tour. I call Japan my Mecca, my homeland, end quote. So when we talk about like Islam from the early 1900s with the Asiatic black man, Noble Drew Ali, thinking of like Mecca proper as the home of Black people, right? So the Asiatic black man, Black people are from Mecca, Black people are from the Arabian Peninsula because they're Muslim. We see this a century later, Megaran talking about Mecca in a very different way, of it providing us this type of like video game and anime inspiration for him and other blurs, self-identified blurs, right? So Mecca to them is different, but I think there's still some echoes there.
Yeah, there's definitely some echoes, and it almost sounds like he's reimagining what that homeland and what that belonging could be.
Yeah.
You know, and in a very similar vein to what, you know, we might be seeing from Thundercat as well as Meg Thee Stallion, you know, how much of this touristic gaze
Gaze, I like this term.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't think I am the originator of that term. I'm just using it. Shout out to the person that does originate that. My bad. When we place that gaze on such a space, how does that also prevent us from seeing the issues that are taking place there, right? And I think this is where, you know, I had another question here where I was like, how do blurred perspectives on Japan change before and after going to Japan, right?
Yeah.
How are they generating these kinds of discussions of, you know, surrounding like a polycultural understanding of what it means to be in Japan versus living in Japan? Because I'm sure, like, let me just throw this out there, right? I'm sure there's also the folks that, for example, join and, you know, go to Japan whatever way they can. So they're going to teach English, but how different is the experience of actually living there for an extended duration of time versus being able to just kind of skip through in a different kind of way?
These are good questions, you know. So that's my
curious.
next step, is going there and interviewing folks who live there. So that's like sort of one chapter I want to focus on in my book is Black people who have fandom for anime, but then go there and live in Japan, and maybe their experiences have changed, or maybe it's been heightened. I don't know, right? So that's kind of the ethnographer. I gotta figure that part out.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And I mean, I want to save the question about like next steps in a little bit, but I want to kind of turn it back to the audience at this point. And I'm curious if you folks here have any questions you would like to ask Dr. Villegas. So, yeah, Ash.
Yes. Okay. This is kind of like, I was curious if you ever heard about this, because I think about it a lot when it comes to what Dr. E is talking about with the touristic gaze, but also specifically like Black culture and being inspired by like Japan. Have you ever heard of America's Greatest Otaku, the TV show?
No, I have not.
So it was a TV show that aired in the early 2000s, in which basically Tokyo Pop, which was this like newsletter, kind of like niche-ish otaku, like American-based. I'm not sure where they were based specifically, but in America, they basically gathered a bunch of like contestants, like mostly in their early 20s, to host a game show where they would all compete their knowledge of Japanese culture, and the person that won at the end would get a free trip to Japan.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest twists at the end was that the Black guy won, which was very shocking at the time.
Yeah.
He was much older than the rest of them. He was like, I think 20 years older than most of them. He was a father, and he had different interests from all of them, and he was into like Kamen Rider. He liked Super Saiyaman, that kind of thing. And we actually get to see him go to Japan and explain kind of like how he faces a lot of disillusionment while going there. Like where he's basically like experiencing Japan, and they kind of push him to like go to a lot of like touristic places, essentially like buy a lot of stuff, go to these things where he's like, this isn't really what I wanted to do when I wanted to go to Japan. But I wanted to ask you basically about like what's your thoughts when it's kind of like I've seen kind of like projections of where it feels like this is where it's like there's an American culture, I feel like, of pushing consumerism onto onto I think like other people as well. So I feel like it's almost a combination of where like the consumerism comes from American culture.
Sure.
And I just wanted to know more of your thoughts about that, because when I think about like in the way like where I feel like Black culture and specifically Black appreciation of other cultures, it kind of gets like twisted, specifically when it's brought into like an American context. I just kept thinking about it the whole time. I kept thinking about that game show while you were talking.
So like American consumerism, like what role does that play in sort of like the reproductions of the problems and promises of Black nerd culture?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's a very postmodern project, right? Like hip hop was also a very postmodern project in my other book of like how do folks find each other and find mutual respect and understanding in politics through like consumer culture, basically, right? Hip hop is hyper consumerism, and I think that for these conventions in blurred culture in general, it is still engaging with consumers. And how do you find politics and promises within consumer culture, right? So this is kind of where I'm at. Some people will reject it and say there's no possibilities of social justice through consumerisms. I'm the other way around. I think people arrive at their politics via the world we swim in, right? This is our culture. So I think there are problems with the consumeristic aspects, like Mega ran here. I think there's something we can critique in terms of like only seeing Japan as a video game country, right? Like there's more to it. There's problems within Japan. There's racism within Japan, which a lot of Black folks will talk about and say, hey, I experienced this. I didn't know it existed until I went there, right? So yes, I think that there's that interlinking, and your question is very, very smart in that way of like, how do you make sense of these contradictions within the consumerist culture and also social justice? Like I think those things are contradictory, but there's still some promises if you can sort of build a project around how to reconcile some of those contradictions. And I don't have answers to that, but I think there's glimpses of hope within this consumerist culture. I had one more thing, but I forgot what it was, but I'll come back to it, I think.
Yeah, no problem.
Your question sparked something in my mind, but I can come back to it. Yep.
All right. Do we have other folks, thoughts, comments, questions? Yes.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Okay.
I'll make it quick.
No worries. Take your time. Here you go.
Thanks a lot for the talk. This is super interesting. Well, two things. First of all, an hour before this, I heard or read for the first time The Tourist Gaze. I'm doing a project for a GA ship.
Yeah.
So I like that you also got excited about that term, and there's a lot of literature out there. So I wish you good fortune in digging into that. My question is, in a talk about Black Orientalism, you chose Islam. The connections are obvious there, and then blurred in the blurred community. Obviously, if we just parse out those words, Black Orientalism, Black nerd, Black to Black, the relationship is evident. But I wanted to know if you could speak a little bit more about how nerdism is seen as an Oriental construction.
Sure.
And how if it is a Oriental or Asian construction, when did the two really kind of start to get perceived in that way?
So when you say Oriental construction, do you mean that Asian people constructed it, or it's a construction somewhere else that is ascribed to Asian people?
I'm not really sure. I guess I'm curious as to how, in a talk about Orientalism, in a talk about Black Orientalism, Black nerdiness is the specific topic there. So that connection between, I'm maybe not even construction is the right word. I guess I'm more interested in that connection between nerdiness and Orientalism.
Sure.
Where did that come from, and what's the context there?
Yeah, so I think I remember my question, my point last time. I can connect the two. The model minority myth, right? This idea that Asian people are doing the right thing, that they're inherently smart, something about their culture has them being technological, really good at math, don't cause ruckus. This comes, so y'all know the model minority myth. You talked about this in different classes, right? So Asian people as not black, right? Asian people as doing the right thing compared to the protesting black folks and Latino folks. So I think you cannot disentangle nerdiness and Orientalism from the model minority myth, which has its own Cold War and pre-Cold War legacy being ascribed to specifically Chinese and Japanese folks. Nowadays, more South Asian, Indians, Pakistanis has been ascribed to model minority myth has been ascribed to that group of folks too. So I think that we cannot talk about Orientalism when we talk about nerdiness without thinking about the legacies of the Cold War era, right? In the 1980s, depictions of Japanese people and Chinese people as students as inherently smarter than white people, right? Something about their culture allows them to overachieve. So I think that nerdiness and geekiness definitely is seen in how they perform in school, right? So do people know who Data is from the Goonies? This is what stands out to me. Has anybody watched the Goonies before, right? One of the main characters is Data. Vietnamese American dude, right? He's an actor, do you know? Right? So he has these gadgets. He's like Inspector Gadget. He has all these gadgets that help the crew escape trouble. And Data, for some reason, knows a lot about technology, right? So this is what I'm reminded of students of these highly intellectual young East Asians, right, as somehow being like just smarter than everybody else. This is a media depiction, but it's also like, again, as I returned to before, a Cold War depiction of Asian people doing the right thing as opposed to black folks doing the wrong thing in the US context of society. Let me connect that to the other point I wanted to make is that it's interesting that the winner of what's it called again?
American's Greatest Otaku
Was black, because a lot of folks I'm meeting through BlerDCon and the memoirs I'm reading, and for example with Megaran, their parents were blerds. So they grew up with Star Trek. They grew up with like Speed Racer. They grew up with comic books. So this is a hidden history, right, of black folks being engaged with nerdy stuff, being model minorities, but we don't think about that, right? This is the racism of our society, of thinking that black folks are somehow abjected from nerdiness. And from what I'm understanding from these scenes is that this is like when you go to BlerDCon, you see grandparents there. You see people in wheelchairs dressed in cosplay. Wheelchair, like young people and old people, right? Who are up there just having such a good time. And it's like grandparents and grandchildren together. So it's beautiful.
So I think one of the things you're also then highlighting is it's also pushing the boundaries surrounding how we think or even conceive of blackness in the United States as well, because it's not as though these sort of engagements between black folks and Asianness didn't exist.
Yeah.
But how readily accepted was it in the rest of society or amongst peers?
Yeah.
And I think about, for example, an earlier slide you had when it came to martial arts. And I'm thinking about the post, Vietnam War kind of period where a lot of folks are coming back from these different duty deployments and were inspired by different martial arts they participated in, right?
You're talking about this slide right here. Yeah,
exactly.
The Black Karate Federation.
Right, and how they're bringing that back into the hood.
Yeah.
Through a variety of different ways. And, you think about that in addition to what's happening with Bruce Lee and what's happening with blaxploitation films and how those connections start to form, but also show that sort of counter hegemonic discourse that you're alluding to when it comes to white supremacy, when it comes to the possibilities of what Asian America has to offer. And I'm kind of, I just wanted to interject that real quick.
Yeah.
But do we have other questions, comments? Yes.
Thank you for your talk. It was really fascinating. I wondered about the term Black Orientalism, because I hear that and I hear Edward Said. I hear like Orientalism 1.0, right? And and it's hard to come up with anything good about that kind of Orientalism, right? It was just white scholars making the Asia they needed so they could be who they wanted to be, right?
Yep.
It was all about rejecting the other.
Yeah.
Are you intentionally invoking that sort of, this is what I need Asia to be so I can be who I want to be?
Yeah, I
Okay.
am.
And is that a problem for coalitions?
It could be. I don't have a precise answer for you. These are things I'm thinking through, and these are the problems I'm trying to sort of swim with, right? So Orientalism, if people could kind of remember what Said was talking about, right, is white people's colonial engagement with Asia, this fantasy production of the quote-unquote East as inherently different, but inferior from Europe and white America, right? Different inherently because of religion, of architecture, of their art, whatever. But with Orientalism 1.0, the first version, what's important is that the Orient is lesser than the Occident, the West. But when we look at the later versions of Orientalism, and this is what I'm engaging with, I'm not the first one to use the term Black Orientalism, is that Orientalism, for some people, this difference is inspiring.
I see.
So the power relationship is different. It's not seeing you as lesser than or inferior. It's sometimes seeing you as better than me, better than my community. So white folks did this as well. Like French people were obsessed in the 1880s, right? French people were obsessed with Japan because they saw Japan as an alternative to this industrializing Western European world, and Japan providing this peaceful, right, this beautiful, peaceful alternative to what was seen as this industrializing modern Europe. So Orientalism is more flexible than just the first definition that Edward Said proposed. I think there's been multiple definitions of Orientalism. I think what I'm looking at is how the power relationship is shifting up and down of whether or not this Orientalism is seen as lesser than Black folks or greater than Black folks or whatever, right? It's something that I think bounces back and forth. So it's a very flexible definition I'm looking at. And then of course I'm still trying to work through what new definition, new word I'm trying to think about. Because I think Black Orientalism is not sufficient for me, but I'm using it as a placeholder for now.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. To the left we go, and then we'll head to the back.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for this presentation. I, as you know, study K-pop, and so this really tracks with what I've seen in K-pop communities, right? Like K-Con is, majority Black and brown young people.
Yep.
And sort of against what you would think, right? They really have these big fandoms for Korea. And similar to what you said, right? It's an alternative to this kind of white supremacist popular culture that exists here. I was really struck by your examples of the Black-owned Chinese restaurant, right? As a response to a lot of Chinese restaurants closing down at that time.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in this hyper visibility that Asians have in popular culture at a time where it's also heightened anti-Asian sentiment and violence, right? So I wonder, does this Afro-Asian solidarity allow for Asian American communities to interface with Black communities, on a human to human social level?
I think so.
Within the U.S., has your research kind of harken to that in any way?
Yeah, I mean that's the hope. So again, the DreamCons and the BlerDCon is 99.9% Black folks. You'll see Asian people there, a lot of Filipinos there. I don't know why, not a lot, but the Asian people are usually Filipinos that I see there. I'm like, hey, what's up? Kind of bond that way. People are like, are you Filipino? I'm Filipino, yeah. Anyway, also mixed race folks, so you have a lot of Blasians there. So I think this is the hope, right, of my scholarly project, is articulating the interfacing. Because right now, what I think is the fantasy interfacing, the image of Japan, the image of China, those two countries, by the way, and Korea. So those three countries are part of the fandom and the fantasy production around Asia. Philippines is not in this conversation at all, right? South Asia is not in this conversation at all. So what about the actual interfacing with people? This is the next step. So the Chinese restaurant is an example of that. He's intentionally curating, the owner of Black Drag is intentionally curating this idea of hey, in this post-COVID world, how do we resurrect this idea of black folks and Asian people living with each other for generations now. So he's intentional about it. I'm hoping that these cons can articulate that intentionality of interface a lot better, but right now it's more of like fandom. And when I talk about like fandom, people just geek out about this stuff. There's no like real intellectual, well, there's some of them. I can talk about the intellectual panels I've been to, but the majority is like, did you know this episode from Naruto? Or like people just, it's more like people quizzing each other on how much they know about an anime. This is the cons that this is the events that I've been to so far at cons. It's like, I know more than you, let me show that. Which is funny, I think.
Flex.
They're flexing.
Yeah.
And they're having a lot of fun. There's a breakdance competition too. Like people are like flexing, like just sort of like having a good time, which
In
is
full
great.
cosplay, right? Like
Huh?
in some cases in full
Full
cosplay.
cosplay.
Yeah.
We're like in big old outfits doing flips. Can you imagine this? Like, can you imagine this type of? No wheelchair people in the break competition.
Right. We had another
Sharon.
question all the way in the back. Here you go.
It's my Kaibigan, my friend from UC Irvine. What's up, Sharon?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for this talk. I'm very curious. Could you tell us more about BlerDCon as a gendered space? Because, like, you
Oh, yeah.
know how like cosplaying, there's a lot of sexualizing
Yeah,
of
yeah.
women, of course. But I've only been to like two as an observer, the Sakura Con and the Furry Con, and there's a lot of experimentation with
Sure.
sexuality and gender too. Do you see that there as a
Yes.
space for
For sure.
countering of course, like, you know,
For sure.
gender binaries, but also like validating sexualization
Yeah.
in Orientalism as
All
well.
of that. All of that's happening, right? So I think what's interesting about these cons is that it's both an experimentation with queerness, like an expression of queer folks and their community gathering and their politics is definitely there. Feminist, all that, right? At the same time, you also have the heterosexual, like macho manosphere guy. So all of that exists at the same time. And I think that's very interesting and also, can I say beautiful? Like you can have this, at a hip hop space, you wouldn't have that, right? But I think in a blurred space, you have the varieties of different type of gender and sexual expressions. So you'll have queer men openly showing their queerness in various ways, women showing their sexuality and celebrating their own sexualization, right? At the same time, you have like these incel guys, right, who are there to be creeps. And that exists. And there's like all these different things I could talk about with rumors of what happens at these cons. But I think one thing to just sort of understand about these places is that all of those different gender identities, expressions are happening in the same space. Women are definitely, representing here. They're not a minority. Women are maybe 60% of the population. Like they're representing, dressing up in full anime gear. Like they're definitely doing the thing, right? So thank you for that question. Yeah.
Nice. To the front we go. Back to Ash.
Yep.
So I was interested in asking this when you said that you weren't really sure about, you were kind of using the term Black Orientalism as kind of like a placeholder. For a little bit of background, I do a little bit of research on my own time on like subcultures in Japan.
Yeah.
And I was thinking specifically, like, have you ever thought of like, this is kind of reach. Have you ever thought of like maybe calling it or kind of addressing it in terms of like Black otakusm?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking in a sense like, when it comes to the term otaku or like when it comes to approaching term as like otaku as like a subculture.
Yeah.
Because like being an otaku or like approaching the kind of like postmodernism of like otakuism is that essentially it keeps fans or people who are otaku stuck within a period of like consistent nostalgia or fantasy that exists within for whatever they're interested in. And otaku like is mostly associated with like anime, video games, and that kind of thing. But in the subculture of like otakuism, this is stuff about like it can be stuff as like random as like the military or like toys or any kind of thing. And it's usually in the context of, at least within the 70s and 80s of Japan, this was at the time used to kind of like recreate a national identity that came out of like post World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there could be a beneficial aspect that comes out of like using Black otakuism as a term to represent an ideal that comes out of like creating a new identity of Blackness by being an otaku.
Yeah. So, what your question, what your comment brings to mind is like these subcategories within geekdom, right? So, like, there's a brand, you can buy Black otaku t-shirts. Like, this is,
Yeah.
it's a brand, right? So, people are selling it. But I wouldn't say that, let me just sort of like lay it out there. Like, I wouldn't say that everybody who attends these things are into the Japanese part. You get what I'm saying? So, some folks are there for the comic stuff, the Star Trek, right? So, the geekism includes otakuism, which is in itself very strong, but it's not exclusive to only otakuism.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Yeah, but definitely this whole like idea of this national identity through otaku is really fascinating to me. It's helpful for me to think about these ideas. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought you did. Do we have other questions from the audience? Okay, because I have a question for you, since I know we're kind of getting close on time.
Dragon Ball Durag.
Dragon Ball Durag.
We can close with it.
Well, we're gonna close. We can close with that because I kind of want to see how you analyze that video as a way, to kind of bring us into your work. But also, you're going to be going to Japan soon. We've got the conference coming up next week.
Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of wondering, like, what are your next steps when it comes to this project?
So I'm going to Japan on Sunday. To interview a few folks who identify as Black nerds, and so Black folks who migrated and live in Japan, and sort of this question about how does their perceptions change once they take the jump from being fans to actually being residents of Japan. And I have some very interesting interviews lined up for that. So I want to make maybe an article about this idea of jumping from fandom to being actual migrants in Japan, living as Black people in Japan, which is very different than living amongst non-Black people non-Asian people in the U.S. and being fans of these things, right? So I imagine my theory, my hypothesis is that once you move there, right, interacting with Japanese people will change your perceptions of your fandom of Japanese culture, and I want to understand what those changes are. So
Definitely.
that's the next step, y'all.
Yeah, and I have other questions in relation to that, especially when it comes to place and but you know what? We will save that for another conversation. So to kind of close out, can you take us through Dragon Ball Durag?
How do I find it first?
Simple. You are on the right side here, and then you can just press play.
I'm gonna close out with Dragon Ball Durag. It's not too long. I can just go forward a little bit. So he finds a Durag Thundercat.
Do you want me to press play? Press play?
Yeah, go ahead and press play. So that's Thundercat. I love him. He's a bassist. He's a singer. He's from LA. His parents were musicians. And he has this whole cat persona. By the way, a lot of cats in Hawaii. Did not know that. Right? So here he is, has this falsetto type of voice. He's in LA and he's basically he finds this do-rag in the garbage, Dragon Ball Z, and he puts it on. So this whole expression of queerness and whatnot, hopefully it's evident to you his gender malleability in his expressions. That's Quinta Brunson, a young Quinta Brunson from circa 2016. This is when she moved to LA. And he puts it on, he thinks he has charisma because he has his do-rag on. And she's just no. Do people know who Quinta Brunson is? Yeah? She is so popular. Her career took off. This is the beginning of her career, by the way, around 2016. And then let me go forward, because he does this to several women. Kali Uchis, she's in this, and she's no, no, no. And then these girls here, these women, they're artists, they're musicians as well. And he pops out from the dumpster. He's hey. That's Thundercat, y'all. So, well, thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you once again, Dr. Villegas. We'll be around for a few minutes in case you have any other questions specifically
I'm here
for
to
him. But otherwise, please stay tuned for the next interdepartmental colloquium talk, which is going to be on what day? November 7th. So in another month.
November
All right,
7th.
folks. Thanks again. Enjoy your day.